Every person who has ever attempted or considered attempting to write historical fiction has faced one daunting question. Can I get it right? If you have ever been intimidated away from attempting historical fiction, this video is for you. I get it. I've always wanted to write historical fiction. I've always been fascinated with stories that are set in a different time. And I have to, as a reader, use my imagination to picture the worlds in which they live. I loved old movies growing up. I am in love with historical fiction and fantasy. I loved Little Women. I loved Little House on the Prairie, King Arthur, and Robin Hood. And just about every fairy tale, even though it's a fantasy, is pictured during a time gone before. So I always wanted to write it too. I always pictured myself writing it. But for a long time, I was scared. I was scared of what I didn't know. I was so scared that a lot of times I would start a fantastic story. And I've found some of those in recent years and reread the opening chapter, which is all I managed to write out, and think, man, this would have been a good story if I had finished it. But then I got intimidated by all the knowledge I needed to have to effectively tell the story that I didn't have and I didn't know how to get. But now I am on chapter 22 of my first novel. And things are changed since I first tried to ever write a historical fiction story. The internet has revolutionized the way we do research. And then you add on top of that AI and the way it is able to scour the internet and save us so much search time. ChatGPT has been invaluable to me for compiling resources and helping me pinpoint where I need to look. But this isn't about how I research. This is about how we can know we're doing okay when we're telling the best story we can possibly tell, even if all the facts aren't right. And this is something I realized while reading an article about a new discovery about the remains of the Beachy head lady. There's been several articles about it actually, and I've seen some commentary in YouTube as well. So maybe you've heard of it. But if you haven't heard of it, here's the story. Back in 2012, when I think they were going to do some renovations in the town hall of East Essex, they came across a collection of skeletons in the basement. Or a collection. Maybe it wasn't all skeletons, but one was in a box labeled Beachy Head 1959. It was a skeleton of a woman. They had no idea where this skeleton came from, who she was, how she ended up in the town hall collection. So they started doing their research. What they determined from radiocarbon dating was that she died between 129 and 311 AD. And next they wanted to know, where was she from? In 2013, it was lauded in media and academic publications, non-fiction books, as it was the first Black Briton known to us, based on measurements of different parts of the skull. And that's a traditional method of ancestry estimation, which is pretty controversial because it's also using skull measurements that differentiate between the different races that was used or developed for eugenics. It was even a plaque. There was even a plaque put up for her that she was the first Black Briton and it was discovered here. All right, fast forward about 5 years to 2017. They did some low-level genetic testing and determined, no, she's not sub-Saharan African. Actually, she's probably Mediterranean. Okay, that still makes sense. It's, as far as being part of the Roman Empire, she could have come in, from that network. But that's kind of a stretch from sub-Saharan African. All right then. Well, Now, high level, high quality DNA testing has determined that she is in fact not sub-Saharan African. Well, all right, we determined that. Not Mediterranean. Okay. She is, in fact, a woman from the south of England, from the place where she was found. And most likely had light-colored hair and blue eyes. So you thought she was sub-Saharan African based on the measurements of her skull. When DNA testing, high-quality DNA testing, has actually determined that she was white. Very, very, very white. Okay. One article I read, a scientist was quoted as saying, "This is an example of science self-correcting." Okay, yeah. That's fine until we're told to trust the science. Without question. This isn't about that. Dawn, move on. I've lost my train of thought completely on this story. You may be saying, now Dawn, what does that have to do with writing historic fiction? I thought this was going to be about writing historic fiction. Well, let's say, just go with me here. Let's say, for example, you read an article in 2013 or one of the nonfiction books. Maybe you even saw the 2016 documentary series called Black and British, A Forgotten History, made by a famous historian, Professor David Olusoga. I don't know how he pronounces his name, so I apologize. But the first episode of his docu-series, and there's a book also with the same name, talks about the Beachy Head Lady and about how she was the first Black Briton. They even made a model of her, how she would have looked, with dark skin, dark hair. Well, if you saw that series and felt inspired, I want to tell a story, imagining what life would have been like for the first Black Briton arriving on the English shores during the Roman Empire. You do your investigations on Roman rule on the English island. You find out what race relations were like, because they were very different when the sub-Saharan population then was not known as a slave class at all. You are in the midst of writing it when they determine that she's not actually Black. She was Mediterranean. Does that impact your story? Depends on how attached you are to that premise of being real. You could still imagine the first Black Briton. You could still recraft that story. But the point of all this is just to say that history isn't as fixed as we tend to think it is. In the story I'm attempting to write right now, one thing that compelled me into wanting to write this story is how many different experiences people living in the same community can have. At a point in time when we speak of like Reconstruction South, and it's a paragraph in a textbook or even a chapter in a textbook, as though that's going to encapsulate everything. It tells you about some things that happened to some people, but that doesn't mean that everyone experienced it the same way. And everybody's story is valid and worth hearing. All we can do is tell the best story that we possibly can. And even the historians that we are relying upon to tell us how history went, they don't even know how history went some of the time, maybe even a lot of the time. We do not have a 100,000 foot view of time, of the earth, of history, going back into the deepest past. or the future going out to its furthest reaches. If you believe as I do that there is a God that created our universe, He knows and He sees it all. But for the sake of our well-being, He does not allow us to see everything. And we're just doing the best that we can with the stories that we have, that we're given, trying to keep learning, trying to keep expanding our minds. So if you have a story in your heart, tell it. Don't be intimidated by the lack of knowledge that you have. You can get it. You can get it well enough. I think it's about to rain. Just do your best. That's what the historians writing nonfiction books about people who didn't even exist, like the Beachy head, Black Britain. Sorry. It just makes me laugh. Sometimes these experts, they kind of hold it over us that we don't know what they know. And here their expertise was turned on its head. I'm a little bit giddy over that. You know, the internet has revolutionized the way we research. There is so much at our fingertips that was never available to us that easily before. And I'm so grateful for that, because the amount of people I have tried to contact to get information who have not answered my calls or returned my calls, and they are not accessible within my city, it's incredible. And then ChatGPT has done so much for me with helping me fine-tune my research, sometimes helping me know where to look. Never trust ChatGPT and what it tells you directly. Go research for yourself. But it does help me focus and encapsulate what is out there and available. I don't know if I could have written the story I'm writing at any other point in time, either because I was intimidated or because I just needed this resource that I have now. And life was just waiting for me to get there. My imagination held on to the story, just waiting for this moment. And so I think all of our moments come. Write your story. You can do research while you're writing your story. That's been a lesson learned for me on this first novel, is that research isn't something you do and then write the story. Although you do that, you do research to build a foundation underneath you. But the specific questions that are going to come up as you're writing the story, you're not going to know until you're writing the story. So research will be ongoing. So don't try to get everything perfect before you actually start writing, because you'll end up going down rabbit trails that won't even be useful to you. And then you'll end up writing and find things you never imagined you would need to know are things you need to research. Just go for it. The historians don't even get it right. The scientists don't even get it right. They're now talking, there's another article I read recently, that Parkinson's may not be a genetic disease after all, or at least not strictly speaking. And they've always attributed it to genetics. We're all of us. We're just learning as we go along and doing the best we can. So write your story. And that's all I have to say about that.